And you are watching At the Races. And some sad news to report first thing this morning. The death of one of the great figures of jump racing, Michael Scudamore, who is, of course, father of Peter and grandfather to Michael and Tom, two very well-known trainers and jockeys of the current era, of course. A great dynasty. Michael Scudamore, aged 81, famed for winning the Grand National in 1959 aboard Oxo. He had a career lasting 16 years, a fantastic rider, nearly 500 winners to his name as well. But above all else, he sounds a fantastic man and a terrific character, judged by the tributes that are coming in his way this morning. And we'll pay our very own tribute to Michael very, very shortly from one of his biggest fans. But a couple of years ago, Matt Chapman went to see the whole Scudamore family, and he caught Michael in reflective mood about his Gold Cup winner.
Going back to Linwell, I eventually took the ride. He was owned by David Brown Tractors, and he had Aston Martins in the end, but he didn't give me one. Yeah, I remember the race. There were only 8 or 10 runners, and I fiddled around. I thought, look after number 1, and he could tap dance his horse in front of a fence, and he would jump super. And when he was wrong, he could tap dance. I turned into the straight, probably one behind me, and thinking, well, this horse, you know, he's going well enough. I'll see if there's anything in the can. I gave him a slap down the shoulder. I nearly fell off the back. He went too far. And next fence I jumped, I woke up in the ambulance room, stone cold. Anyway, Ivor Herbert trained him, and he said, would I ride him at Warwick next meeting? And I trotted up then, and that's how I got the ride on him.
Michael Scudamore, who has died aged 81, talking there about his Gold Cup hero back in 1957, Linwell, the horse concerned. Now, one of Michael's greatest fans joins us now to chat about his life and career and the effect he had on him. Brough Scott, of course, one of our most respected journalists and broadcasters. He joins us now on the programme. Good morning to you, Brough. Sad circumstances, but astonishing memories for you personally with regard to Michael Scudamore.
Oh, yes, he was one of my great heroes when I was starting. He was like a sort of a riding uncle to me, because, I mean, I suppose I'd be sort of 19, 20, and I suppose he must have been in his early 30s, and, you know, he'd seen it all. He'd won the Grand National. But he was such a... When I just heard his voice as I came on the phone, I hear his voice. He was such a great guy. He really was. And he was a beautiful, beautiful horseman. I remember writing a piece about him when I was still, when I was still riding, and saying at that time, there used to be a show jumper called Peter Robeson, who rode a horse called Firecrest. Very ancient reviewers will know this, but what he used to have a white rein, and it used to look wonderful because his hands were beautiful. Well, I remember writing that Michael Scudamore had a white rein on his horse because the length of rein he gave a horse to jump, he did it in a way other people didn't do and haven't done since. He had this fantastic balance and strength around a horse. And he was, that great word fearless is often done, and often it's used in the phrase of they're fearless because they're into the cannon's mouth and they'll rush at anything. But he was fearless because he just wasn't prepared to be cowed by anything, and he was again, the word modest is often used also wrongly as sort of someone who's dull and boring and sort of humble. He didn't need to boast, Michael. He didn't need to boast. He was so tough. And what was lovely about him, he was, and all the Scudamore family, because in many ways Tom is still, even though he takes the mickey out of him, in awe of his father. His father Peter has always been in awe of Michael, how tough he is. And Michael, in turn, and I remember him telling me this, he was in awe of what his father and uncles had done, because they'd flown, in the war, and turning up and riding at Hereford in a 40-runner novice chase, compared to flying a bomber with people going around you, is nothing. And he very much had that perspective. When he was riding in the sort of 40s, were people who'd been in the war, and he realised, and people realise now when they look at terrible things on the television, that sport's still just sport, and he put it in perspective. But goodness he was a rider.
A fantastic rider, and his son Peter, of course, many times champion, and the youngsters now doing really well. Michael training and Tom riding. A fantastic dynasty, Brough.
Yes, it is. I remember sort of planning to see if we could actually do a book about it. I didn't quite get it off the ground, but the sort of working title was Hearts of Oak, because the Scudamores represent that sort of body of English, and it's a dangerous word, but culture of you know, they're Herefordshire people, and they're proud of it, and they represent those old-fashioned values, but, you know, they're actually taking them into the 21st century. I mean, forget about Tom. Tom is perfectly up to speed, but Peter does Twitter and goodness knows what, and I don't think, I can assure you that Michael didn't, but Michael used to love to watch Tom on, it kept him going, watching Tom on television. But no, they were a great dynasty, but they represent, you know, anybody who goes to anyone who's ever been, and anyone hasn't been listening in here, has ever been to Ludlow races. You need to go to Ludlow races, not just for the races, but for the location and the feeling you get. And that's that and Hereford, that's Scudamore country. And they were, you know, you could do a Houseman Poe about Scudamore country, because they were countrymen, but they loved horses. And again, this is not jump racing is not a soft game, and it's no good trying to soften it up too much. Its challenge is that it's a tough game. It needs tough people, and Michael was tough, but he wasn't. Again, the other thing that he taught me very early on, you get tough people who like to try and be clever and cruel and sort of snidey. He'd never do the dirty on you, Michael. He wouldn't dream of doing that, but he wouldn't. You know, there wouldn't be any nonsense. And I think perhaps the greatest example is what you saw last weekend in tennis, of people absolute sort of hand-to-hand combat. They don't touch you, but you know, jump racing, going around something like Stratford, you're pretty tight on each other and thumping around and meeting a fence very quickly. But you can get into rows, but you hold your lines. You can respect each other, and everyone always respected him. You know, and he went on for a long time. And I'll never forget that last fall he had. You know, smashed his face to bits. You remember, there was a black horse called Snakestone. I don't know why I remember it, but it was one of those horrible. I think if you're riding, it's one of those things that everybody always has at the back of their head and then wants to discuss. The fear of being brought down and smacked in the face. And I think he hit a post, if I remember right. It was at Wolverhampton. But it's that's the sort of thing that lingers in the back of your head. You don't want to discuss it. And when someone does get hurt like that, you know you have to discuss it. And you know it could be you. But he, you know, and talk about footballers writhing in mock pain. I mean, there was no mock pain about Michael. You'd have to practically break him in half to stop him riding. I mean, even AP is probably not tougher than Michael. And you know, if you looked at his frame, he was a magnificent physique for a jump jockey. Really powerful arms and legs, not too tall, very strong, and had quite a deep seat on a horse. But he, as I say, he had a great balance about him. I actually really want to know this. I can't find it. I've got a picture somewhere. Mind you, it's slightly more flattering of him than me, be surprised to hear. Of the 1964, I think it's the Grand Annual Chase. It's two races after Arkle won the Gold Cup. And I am actually leading Michael Scudamore over the second last, but needless to say, he won the race, and I didn't. But anyway, it's one of my proudest possessions, because he was a great rider, but more importantly, he was a really splendid man.
Brough, a lovely tribute to Michael Scudamore. Thank you very much for your time, Brough. You take care.
It's a pleasure.
That's Michael Scudamore, who has died, aged 81. And last night, Tom Scudamore on Twitter tweeted this about his grandfather. He was the original and best. I wish I was half the jockey, and most importantly,